Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I'm Leonardo from Brussels, talking from Brazil right now. Thank you for allowing me to do it remotely today. I hope in the future I'll be able to do it physically also. And today we talk about different data-driven methods we are employing to attempt prediction of pitting corrosion. It's a very tough topic, as you see. So the outline of this presentation, I will let clear the aims of this talk. We will briefly discuss the methods employed, and then, of course, results and discussion, and a few messages to take home, which are related to the aims that we are targeting. So each one of those aims, let me just try to minimize. Yes, now it's better. Each one of those aims is related to a particular work, I would say a standalone work. The first message would be when dealing with such unpredictable phenomena like pitting corrosion, we should definitely to consider the randomness of the process when embedding different modeling strategies. And the second aim is to show the importance of machine learning, not only for prediction, but we can do much more. If you have the right data, it's also powerful for descriptive modeling and also for the estimation of your descriptors. The third point of importance is it's also a point of debate, of course, among the machine learning community, but I am of the opinion that as scientists, we should take advantage of the domain expertise we have and proceed to what I would call pre-labeling strategies. So it's all about the importance of the data labeling, right? And the fourth aim, I'd like to showcase through a short study case in which we leverage transfer learning. In this case, for prediction of atmospheric corrosion, it's a bit out of topic, but it's also a very challenging one, and it showcases also the same challenges that we will be discussing. So let's start with the methods. For the three first aims we are chasing, the three first studies, we employed a local electrochemical tool, and it acts in a high throughput mode. In fact, it's a miniaturized version of a classic three-electrode electrochemical cell. And we can probe the surface, and at each location, we can run individual potential stat-based tests. For the first three studies we will be discussing, we have done potential dynamic polarization, and for the third one, we have done potential static. This is a droplet-based technique, so you should realize that each one of those individual footprints left on the surface have about 1 micron of dimension. So we have varied the scan rate of the potential dynamic polarization and also the chloride concentration, which is related to the aggressiveness of the corrosion test. And after that, in this study in which we varied, as I mentioned, the chloride concentration, the scan rates, we were able to obtain those types of curves. And in the third study we will address, we choose a fixed applied potential equal to 1.2 volts. And our approach in this case was chronoamperometry. So fixed potential and the measure of current over time. And we choose this particular potential because it really is between two very important regions. We really are in between a transition zone, passivity of the metal, and then at a higher anodic potential passivity breakdown. So let's start with the first study, which is called Probing the Randomness of the Local Current Distributions of 316L, which is a stainless steel, a classic one. Corrosion in sodium chloride solution. Related codes and data sets can be assessed as described in these details. And as I mentioned, we employ different combinations of aggressiveness, if you will. On the top left, we have the least aggressive condition, and on the bottom right, the most aggressive condition. As you see, as we increase the aggressiveness of the test, we tend to get higher spread and wider and wider distributions. These are simply 3D histograms where we plot the histogram of the current density that we measure, and that represents corrosion as a function of applied potential. And we realize that at low applied potential, as you can see on the top, the distributions, although not quite normally distributed, the current density tends to follow unimodal type of distribution. And as we increase the aggressiveness of the test, the distribution tends to diverge, and the spread is much higher. And in fact, it increases the likelihood that we can fit the distribution by the uniform distribution. And this trend was verified not only for increasing testing aggressiveness, but also as a function of potential. So we realized that, as I mentioned, this higher likelihood of fitting the data with the uniform distribution was directly related to the higher randomness of the current density. So we decided to follow closely the variance of the current density as a metric of randomness in this case, but you could use different types of randomness metrics. And interestingly, this region was completely correlated to the passivity breakdown region, which now it appears to us to be a region more, we should look at it more in statistical terms rather in terms of well-defined regions. And this high randomness is ultimately linked to pitting phenomena or localized corrosion. As you can see, after that potential, we have increasing chances of getting stable pitting, but the distributions can be pretty wide because sometimes we have early passivity breakdown, etc., etc. And after that, we realize that if you would like to deploy machine learning for pitting corrosion, the first critical step would be, in fact, to develop algorithms for estimating pitting potential, because in corrosion it's very important to define this point where we have localized corrosion, but where are this point lying? It really depends on the heterogeneities that we find on the surface and on the experimental conditions. So this opened the doors for our second study, in which we employ machine learning for estimating the pitting potential, as you see. In fact, the estimation of pitting potential is in principle a problem that can be solved by linear regression. It's simply this inflection point right there. But in corrosion, there's no really standard method for doing so, although you can follow an ISO. It often says it's the point where we have a sharp increase in current, but we don't have a numerical definition or a numerical standard for defining this very important parameter. So first thing we did, we developed a simple linear regression, in fact, two of them. And this point is simply the sweet spot, is the spot that maximizes the goodness of fit of these two regression lines. And this was able to solve 80% of our problem, but we would really like to achieve 100% in this case. We had about 1,000 of curves, and we could have done it manually. So we could have collected these labels manually. Although I know, of course, all models have biases, I'm sure that if I have done that by hand, my bias would be worse over time after 1,000 curves. So we developed this algorithm, and we trained a neural network to understand how this point was estimated, and we used the remaining 20% of the data that we call bad estimates, right? The ones that the points were not good because for one or another reason, curves were more complex. And the neural network have done a very good job in finding the points that we were looking at. And after that, we were able to plot the pitting potential distribution displayed in red, but not only that, we used the same type of model for estimating the passive potential, which is the potential width we get into a plateau. The current that we measure is really constant as a function of the applied potential. So these are in fact not the estimates as such. We model the distribution using a kernel density estimate, and the idea was to get the maximum value of these kernel density estimates to consider it as a ground truth, because of course all the time you are deploying a machine learning model, you want to compare how a model behaves as compared to a ground truth. And although these are quite wild distributions, we need something to compare. So our decision here was, okay, let's assume our ground truth are just those most probable values lying on, let's say, on the center of those distributions. And by doing that, what was interesting that we were able to compare the machine learning estimates with what we call proxy models. So these are simplified models. So on the left, I simply show the mean curve of the population, and on the right, median of the polarization curves population and the associated deviations as well. And the circles that I show here are what we consider the ground truth. So this corresponds to that maxima value from the kernel density estimation. So it was very interesting to see that if we feed in, if you give as an input to the machine learning model, for example, the mean curve, the machine learning model, of course, will provide some output, in this case, the EPIT, but this output lies quite far from our ground truth. However, if we input the median, results were not that bad. So the argument would be, instead of doing all of that work, that labeling work, which can be quite extensive, if we could simply find the median of the distribution, the median could do a very good job and could a much simpler job with much more, I would say, industrial interest as well. So we perform residual analysis to really show that the median that I show in green in those box plots was very often overperformed the mean proxy model, regardless of the descriptors we were trying to estimate. And well, once we have access, the advantage of these proxy models, they are much easier to interpret, right, than a machine learning model. So we understood that the median model was behaving or performing very well because it really corresponded. So I showed the median in green on the right, and the median really corresponded to the highest data density regions from the data population. And strikingly, we were able to immediately see why the mean curve was shifted upwards. This was due to the effect of high outliers. And again, these high outliers are cases where we have particularly active sites on the surface, leading to very, very active bits on the surface. And here I show we should always try to plot histograms, right? We could not escape from it. So seeing the histograms of the descriptors, both the passive potential as well as the beating potential, we are able to confirm something that is very well known in the literature, that is, as we increase the corrosiveness of the test, we tend to decrease or short the passivity range. But what was kind of a novelty, a data-driven insight here, was that the shortening was not mainly due to a decrease in EPIT, as we would expect, but more due to a delayed stabilization, meaning the system would need more time or more energy to properly passivate the surface. And one last slide on this study. We have not yet attempted that, but we would suggest if somebody attempt prediction of pitting corrosion, instead of focusing on the entire population, curves population, select the most active curves, because at the end, what governs the macroscopic behavior are these weak spots on the surface that are more susceptible to pitting, or at least to very intense pitting corrosion. So we will probably try it in the light of the weakest link theory, which, by the way, was already applied to corrosion research. And now, I hope this is the middle of my presentation. I think we have a bit of time. So Our third study is in fact unpublished results. This is really ongoing work. It's based, as I mentioned, the same method, the same technique, right? That high throughput tool, the same material, but here we are employing potential static data. And our holy grail here would be to link the corrosion descriptors with the surface properties of the materials. So this has been done with in collaboration with colleagues from UPCT Paris and also Professor McDonald from UC Berkeley. We are still dealing with this data. So my main message here, because we haven't yet come to solid mechanisms or conclusions, but for sure, what is clear is that we should label the data priorly. The pre-labeling here was crucial. So let me explain why. We can collect all different types of quantitative numerical descriptors from this type of curves. Each one of those transients that we observe correspond to phenomena of the pitting process, right? And I can do it, or a corrosion expert could do it, or could distinguish the data very easily. We know that here we have a much more stable pit than in here, for example, and so on. So you could leverage unsupervised learning for trying to cluster the data. But at some point, you should have something to compare against. And we should take advantage of those labels. This is my main message. I hope it will become clear, because we derived all sorts then of numerical descriptors, as I show. And each one of the data points on the surface have all those descriptors associated. And we can link this footprint, for example, with the orientation of the grain boundaries, right? But without the labels, we just have data points like that. We can infer some correlations, of course. But if you want to get the extra layer of knowledge, you should take advantage of your domain expertise labels, in my opinion. So there was a clear trend in the data, regardless of the descriptors we were looking at. There was a drift over time, and realized that that was the case. Because the area of analysis, or the testing area, was shrinking over time. Here I plot as a function of test number, the area of analysis, and we could clearly depict this trend. So although in the community, people using this technique express the measurement as currents, we decide to express here for corrosion as current density. So domain knowledge helps us to, in fact, normalize all the data, all the current or charge data with respect to the area. And then we completely detrend, and we get expected detrend data because of that. And again, here I show you correlations of descriptors. There are very interesting findings. Once we embed the previously defined labels into the result, things become much clearer. We had only one case where we really have catastrophic failure. So this was even observed from the microscopy, this meta major event, and we were able to see that it belongs to, I would call it an anomaly or an outlier, if you will, in terms of grain orientation. And also, here I come back to the same plots as I showed before, but now that I have shown here, but now adding the labels. So just by coloring the data, we are able to understand that different types of events are present on those curves. They might have the same physical origin because they are very intrinsically correlated, like the green and the yellow labels, or the green and yellow data points. Although, of course, manipulating the data or choosing one correlation plot instead of another, we can better draw the decision boundary across our data. But if you have not labeled your data previously, you would not have understand that. And this has really been key for us to now realize that different types of events occur on the surface. An algorithm might have taught or learned that the events that occur on the surface just have different intensities. But now we are understanding that these are in fact different types of defect, which has been very, very important for us. And the Holy Grail, as I mentioned, now we are approaching correlation between corrosion. The descriptors, for example, here are the heights of the peaks of those transients as a function of the grain orientation. Here is the condensed version or data reduced version of grain orientations, all reduced into only one vector, the LGA1. And we are trying to see the correlations, most important for our outlier, which happens to be our most important data point there. Okay, with that, I finished this third study, and this is a faster case study about we can do whatever we want. Sometimes we simply cannot dispose of the data we would like to. For example, in corrosion, we are always trying to estimate or forecast what happens in field, but it's much easier for us and we have much more understanding of the lab data, right? So in this case, we can leverage transfer learning as a very suitable tool for linking lab data with in-field data. And this work was in fact mostly developed by my colleague, my student, Vincent Van Handenberg from VUB Brussels as well. And he worked also on a lot on data sets provided by Professor Daiwei Zhang from the US2B. And it was a beautiful work. And in fact, is the successor work as a first survey that we did also with Professor Zhang, that this was a data-driven review from the state-of-the-art of machine learning applied to corrosion. We realized that corrosion should be treated as a time series problem. And if you include time as a variable, you increase the performance of your models. So as I mentioned, we decided to use transfer learning to realize a first training or source training on lab data, and then fine-tune the model on outdoor exposure data and aiming at forecasting these outdoor data that are very, very complex. And the complexity lies in the fact that depending on the week you choose, for example, this data were obtained from a galvanic corrosion sensor from Nanjing. Depending on the week you choose to analyze your sensor data, you have a completely different feature space. So very, very challenging. But transfer learning seemed to be a very promising technology in this case. And different techniques were chosen. You can follow the details in the article if you will. But at the end of the day, important part was that the transfer learning in average not only was more performant than the other classic baseline models, but especially in case where, as a function of time, we have high corrosion activity, especially in those cases, transfer learning has done a much better job than baseline models, I would say. So with that, a few conclusions. First one, you should really embed uncertainty into your modeling approach when dealing with these problems that can be understood in the light of the weakest link theory, right? In terms of predictive design of pitting corrosion, we show that it's very handy to dispose of a proxy model. In our case, the conditional median of the current was a very good to provide reliable estimates of pitting descriptors. And third conclusion, the most important part, or at least not to forget, is the data labeling, because the scientific community has not a lot of knowledge to interpret the data. This is a way of taking advantage of that. As you know, nowadays, with a few lines of code, you can deploy state-of-the-art machine learning models. So in my opinion, the bottleneck for us is more on this side of the equation. And fourth conclusion, the actual data we dispose of are sometimes not reflective of the conditions that the material will face. So transfer learning, it's a very important tool in this aspect. With that, I'd like to finish my presentation and thank all my collaborators, mainly across Belgium, but also in France, in the US, and in China. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure to present to you.
Okay, thanks, Delanada, for your nice talk. Now is question and discussion time. Any question? Okay, so I would ask you a question. So please show last conclusion PPT slide. Okay, do you think it is difficult? It is possible to realize the automatic data labeling in the future? Do you think data label?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I got your question. May I answer?
So I mean that you mentioned the challenge of corrosion scientist data yes. Label, data marking. Yeah.
Well, this is I think so. My point is that, anyways, if you want to develop methods for that, you need to compare the efficiency of your approach with something, to some ground truth labels. And I think that sometimes the corrosion community we are not giving enough attention to the collection of those labels. It's a challenge per se, and for that you should or you could deploy machine learning, any data-driven technique, will even unsupervised learning to make it more robust. But at the end of the day, it's a supervised task, and I think the beauty of it is that anybody in the community would be able to do that, not only really experts in machine learning, but any scientist understands. We spend so much time understanding all the minor details of our data. So although I believe in the future this could be automatized, it takes a lot of time. It's I will not say it's even harder than prediction. Although it's not prediction, would be more estimation, right? It's super challenging. And it really depends on each data set. When you really understand your field, every different graph, you can tell a different story. So this can be done, but in principle, case by case, in my opinion, not in a generalized fashion as we would like.
Okay, thank you. So, any other question?
Hello, Nanner. Okay. Thanks for your presentation. It's quite comprehensive. I'm a PhD student from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And actually, I'm not an expert in this field, so I'm almost confused during this period. But I want to go further in this topic. So my first question is quite basic. So what's your input and output for your model? So maybe this is a tutorial for me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it depends. Maybe I will show you a simpler to understand example. We are still, like, the corrosion community is still trying to understand, right, which data points should we use, should we treat the test time series or not. In this particular case, we were trying to estimate this point right there. And this point right there, the most important, so this would be the output. You can think it as a XY coordinate. So some people even told me that a convolution neural network built to understand the image, for example, would do a better job than the deep learning. But anyways, the most important for us is this X value here. So let's say this point would be around 1.2, because this represents the energy or the potential we apply to the material, and that the material starts to corrode critically, which can lead to catastrophic failure. So this is the output we are looking for. And as input, I provided as input the current values, so values from the y-axis. We employ different data reduction techniques. The one that served well for us, it was a very simple one. We got about 13 points that were equidistant in terms of x-axis, as you can see. So each one of those blue dots corresponds to a input filter that we would find in the input layer. Why we found this number, this magic number was representative enough of the curve. So we would just want the model to learn at which point or at each x-axis point we have this inflection point. So you can see that with 13 points, we kind of get, let's say, the whole behavior of the curve already. I don't know if that answers your question more or less.
Okay, so because this is a tutorial for me, so can I say that this you want to learn from the current and voltage to predict the further pitting behavior, right? Can I say that?
That's correct. Yes,
yeah,
that's
okay. And my second question is, so if you want to predict the pitting behavior, and from my knowledge, I think that the pitting behavior can be related to the microstructure or morphology, right? Maybe from your data set, can we say that the morphology or microstructure, the information about this how to say that material already be included in the data set, right?
Yes, that's true. To this point, the model has not yet seen indeed the microstructure data, although the holy grail would be indeed to predict, let's say, the pitting potential or other corrosion descriptor based only in purely microstructural data. At the moment, we are still dividing it to see if we can find a correlation between electrochemical data and, let's say, microstructural data. I totally agree. It's just that experimentally talking, it's much easier in our field to collect electrochemical data. You do one individual test here, you collect dozens of descriptors. You can collect, are very meaningful. And in order to extract surface descriptors, you need to be able to do what we call multi-correlative analysis. All of this is it's less than 100 microns, and you should be able to find the surface afterwards on the microscope, right? Or on the EBSD associated microscope. So it's not that easy. So this data here on the left is much harder to obtain. On the right, high throughput. On the left, you have to spend many hours to really find the map that you build and so on, and correlate understanding all those footprints. It takes more time, but you are absolutely right.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renata, your nice talk again, because now the time is finished. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay.